Hi, folks. This is Randy Rice with another episode of the Value of Testing podcast. Today, I have with me my friend and a guest, Greg Pascal. I'll introduce him a little bit more in detail in just a second. I just want to talk about a couple of things off the top here. First of all, today is an anniversary for me. This is the 36th anniversary of the day that I became an independent software testing consultant. So Rice Consulting Services was actually officially started on this day, June 3rd, 1990. Boy, technology was way different back then. I was thinking about that. We didn't have the internet. We were using a lot of fax machines. So we didn't have email either. It was crazy. 286 processors. Macs were around, but they were just a little cube, at the time. And anyway,
Unexpected.
it's just been amazing. I've met all kinds of great people like Greg and so many other people along the way. Got to know Bill Perry, wrote a couple of books with him. And of course, many of you who may be watching this podcast may have been part of this journey as well. So I appreciate it. Just wanted to kind of mention that. And also, I have an upcoming class here in June. Today, we're recording this on June 3rd, by the way, 2026, obviously. And I would like to put a timestamp on things because when we talk about anything AI, which we're going to talk about today, I'm always looking for relevancy and putting a point in time and when it's at and all that. So June 3rd today, so June 26th through the 29th. I'm sorry, I got that date totally wrong. It's actually June 23rd through the 26th of this month. I have a ISTQB advanced test management class that I'm hosting. Details are at mysoftwaretesting.com. So if you have a need for that certification, or maybe someone in your organization is looking to move into the role of a test manager, then I really encourage them to check that out. Okay, so today I'd like to welcome Greg Pascal, a friend for over 20 years, I believe now.
Yeah.
We are, you know, we're great friends. We share a lot of the same, I think, philosophies in testing. And Greg, I consider to be the wizard of test automation. He is just so great at what he does, and we've worked together on engagements before. And it's just amazing. And so he came to me recently with something that he had kind of discovered in the world of AI. Oh, before I get to that, pardon me one more time. I discovered something yesterday in AI that I just had not experienced before. Maybe some of you have. And that is ChatGPT has a sense of humor. I was working on a dishwasher. I couldn't figure it out. Chat told me to go turn the breaker off for 15 minutes, turn it back on, and it worked. I mean, it had to be off for a period of time for it to work. Anyway, we started bantering back and forth, and I started making jokes. It made jokes back, and it was just a wild experience. So anyway, Greg, welcome to the show.
Thank
Uh,
you, Randy.
good to have you here.
It's
Um,
great to be here too. Thank you.
well, thank you. So I'm going to let you start out here. Tell me a little bit about this trail that you have gone down, and some things that you've observed, and how AI behaves, especially in ways that, as testers, it may be a little bit counterintuitive to the way we typically think about some of our tests. And I'm not talking about the deterministic versus non-deterministic stuff. I'm talking about things that may fail, that we have no idea where they're failing or when they're failing. So, kind of bring us up to speed on that, if you would.
Yeah, well, Hey, Randy, it's good to be here with you today. I just had a great chance to do a conference with our friend Joe Colantonio a couple weeks ago at the Automation Guild. He did a local session here in Nashville, and as I was prepping for that, I was finding new things, and in that conference, I shared kind of how I got here. I really suspect there are very few experts in AI right now, but there's a lot of folks that are on the journey with us, right? I think probably if you consider the days of the gold rush or something like that, everybody got a wagon and they started heading west. And, they might have got a pan and a couple things, but they were kind of picking things up along the way, how to mine for gold and other things. And in a way, we're kind of in that same boat with AI. We're on a bit of a gold rush. We've heard there's gold in them there hills, and we're all headed west or wherever it might be. But we're picking up you know nuggets and morsels along the way on how to do this. It seems safe to say this field is full of lingo. I mean, it's an endless a mire of it that you can get lost in.
Yes. Yes.
Uh, Randy, I just came back about a month ago from a great conference that Google does every year called the Next Conference, and so they had Next 2026, and I went to the one the previous year, but there was something really interesting that happened at that conference. It's enormous in size. I think there were over 35,000 people there this year, and I mean they take over this entire hotel in Vegas. It's crazy. Uh, when they had the keynote, I was surprised. They said something you don't normally hear a company like this share, but I actually really enjoyed that they shared it. Because as a teacher, I found the most effective thing in instructing or coaching others is the ability to be candid and transparent about the things you're learning and the things you don't know. Actually, buy you some of the most credibility when you work with students. I really would be hard pressed to think there are a lot of experts in this space of AI right now. I do generally feel that we have a lot of people, kind of bolting it onto their LinkedIn profiles and all the other things right now. But this is going to be a field that's going to take, a while to have some expertise, and there are some that are brilliant at it. But at the conference, what was interesting is they got up and said, a year ago from April, they said, we introduced this concept of agents. And they said, now a whole year's gone by and we're still trying to figure out what that even means. I thought that was pretty bold for a company of that size to share that. But what I loved about it is it lowered the guard of all these people that were there who were, again, mired in the lingo. So for our community, I want to encourage you to know that it's probably normal right now that you feel like the other guy's got it and you don't. That would be a really normal thing. A little bit of that imposter syndrome, maybe more than a little bit, that I suspect almost everybody who's got their toe dipped into this water is feeling. Um, if you need to, find some folks that are willing to kind of share they're figuring this out along the way. You probably are finding some more genuine people if they can do that. And I'd probably be a little more cautious of the experts right now, unless you really genuinely know their expertise. So why that was so great to have happen at that conference is then we went through the next 4 days of the conference where people could say this thing: "Are you using agents yet? Have you figured this out yet?" Instead of them just throwing lingo out. And that allowed us to have some of the best conversations. That's why I love going to this conference so much. I experienced the same thing a year ago. So I think that we need to be, especially as a QA community, we should be asking more questions now than ever, and maybe even resisting the, kind of falling in love with the terminology, but instead understand the terms and then adopt them and probably try to put them in some format you could share with grandmother or with your parent that they can get it. Because I would suspect, Randy, a lot of us are the go-to in our family when someone's got something broken. They come to you and they call Randy. Randy, I can't figure out how to get the remote working, right? Or they can't figure something out. And so if you can explain technical concepts to people like our family members or something, you probably can explain these AI concepts to others. I think it's a good
Yeah.
basic tool.
That's a really good point, Greg. I tend to have a lot of my conversations about AI in terms of what does the future look like a year or two from now, from like a economic perspective, a job perspective, that kind of thing. A lot of the people that I know that use AI in the non-IT space, they're using it for pictures, for music, to write a few things, those kind of things. Very light, users. I have a question for you though about that conference. So, th- there's this. I'm going to call it a gap, but between the people who are heavy to the metal AI proponents, let's go as fast as we can, as much as we can. You may have heard it like I have, the AI arms race kind of thing, and then on the other end of that spectrum, the people who are really wanting to pay attention to safety and those kind of things. Did you hear any talks around that? And did you hear, were there, did you bump into any other QA testing kind of people who are trying to explore this space, what it means for us testers? Kind of a two-pronged question there, but
Yeah. Well, let me answer the second one. I was really, I didn't encounter um, any other quality engineers in the entire conference. I encountered a lot of devs and other folks that were there to try to figure out, they had been sent there to say, go there and figure it out so you can apply it. But I encountered a lot of technical folks that were there trying to figure out how they were going to implement it.
hmm
And like I said, I was amazed how many lunches I sat down with where people just said, I'm not getting this fully. Tell me what are you getting of this part? And we were able to collaborate a little bit and talk about a small piece of it we had. Again, I would really caution our community to be careful about throwing out words that we might not fully understand, because when someone hears you use the word agentic is a great example, or
hmm
agents, um, you're actually kind of setting them up for maybe feeling like they can't say, I have no idea what you're talking about. It would be much better to say, hey, have you heard about this concept where AI can communicate with other small things? I think they call those agents, and it can go and perform tasks. That's called agentic AI. And you can maybe educate just through simplifying the concepts. And things like that can really help our QA community, probably can help your dev community too, showing a little bit of that. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's good. I remember the first time I heard this term. It was last October at a local technology conference here in Oklahoma City. There's a company here that I have a friend that owns it,
Hmm.
called Clever, and they did some they did a talk, I guess, at this conference, and that was all about using AI agents, and that was my first exposure to it. But it seems like we just made this huge leap, from seeing AI as being kind of like this assistant. In fact, I had a lunch with a guy that was pretty high up in the food chain at a technology company, and he encouraged me to see AI as a tool, as an assistant. Seems like we've kind of gone across that to the agentic view of AI. I don't know. Maybe I'm biased. Maybe the algorithm is serving up way too many YouTube videos for me that are based on the last YouTube video that I saw. But I see all these people kind of dabbling or even going full throttle in agentic kind of AI approaches, and just having it do all kinds of things. And maybe it's like one of those illusions, where you think everybody else is doing something. Automation is a great example too, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, we kind of, there's this perception that everyone is great at automation.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Actually, it's there's quite a deficit out there of it being done well, from
Yeah.
what I've seen. I think I had like your dishwasher story. I had the most interesting opportunity yesterday. My wife wanted to order. We ordered something through the mail, and it wasn't being delivered through like FedEx or UPS or whatever. It was coming through another company, one I had never heard of before, but I understand is really common with like Temu and whatever. I don't even know all those other e-commerce sites, but it's meant to be a very inexpensive way for those kind of companies to get things to our house. Well, this item on their website says it had been in my city and was out for delivery for 4 days. And I have a city that you could literally walk across in a day. So obviously, it's there was some mix up here. But when I tried to get a hold of the shipping company, I was immediately directed to a chatbot, an AI chatbot. And man, I couldn't get a human on the line for anything. So I thought, okay, I've got this chatbot. It's clearly using AI because it's trying to be empathetic and I'm sorry your package isn't here. If you go to this website, you put your code in. It says it's on the way. It was very unuseful. Um, and what was interesting, to be honest, at one point I just got frustrated and I thought about how we do security testing or how we might have done something like SQL injection or whatever. So I actually found out there's a whole type of testing. You probably have heard of it called red team testing. I'm kind of new to that term. I'd never heard that before. But I started asking the bot for some other information, and before you know it, it had disclosed to me its entire enum set of variables and descriptions, and I was essentially getting to the backend system. And I thought, wow, that took me, 10 minutes to go ahead and basically start to expose the backend system. And for our quality engineers, your ears should have just perked up because what we're encountering now is probably the fruit of senior management pressuring the technology organization to put AI in somewhere, in some place, in some form. It's introduced some of the biggest risk we have probably ever encountered in our QA career right now. Because
Absolutely.
realize I didn't need to use Postman and I didn't need to use any special tools. All I had to do was use my voice and the chat window they brought up, and I was able to exploit the back end of their system within less than 15 minutes.
My goodness.
Um, yeah.
An analogy of that would be like if you walked into a company and to the reception desk and you started having just a conversation with the person working that desk and you started saying, so who's at the top of your org chart and then who's below that and who's below that and what times do the doors open and to reveal any kind of information you can to gain access. It's a form of almost like social engineering,
Yeah.
except it's through the chatbot. That's fascinating
Well,
and
and
scary.
now what you find, it is scary, is before that used to take the capabilities of someone who understood tools like Postman and
Hmm.
understood backend services. That's completely gone now. All you have to
Hmm.
do is know the English or a language. I'm going to use English because that's what I speak, um, and have enough curiosity to start asking enough questions. And I did some research on this actually using Anthropic's Claude yesterday. I actually shared the entire thread based on this chat bot, and it was able to identify that's not supposed to happen. It says what you've uncovered is this. And so I said, well, I had this discussion. It's interesting that we're talking about AI, but in some cases using it for some analysis. That's the part I really love about it, to be honest. Although I always have to be aware that it is an incredible liar too. I at the conference I shared, it's like working with with a toddler, a 5-year-old toddler with ADD who's a great liar. I mean, you have to it wanders and everything else.
Hmm.
But it's interesting that it revealed this, and I said, well, how do you lock this down anymore? Now in our previous methods as coders, I'm as much a coder as a QA guy, by the way. So I'm
Hmm.
I'm writing code almost every day. It's just another part of my life I really am passionate about. As a coder, if I'm writing, let's say, a front end to authentication, well, I have control of that. So I'm locking things down, access to my database, or whatever might provide a vulnerability. But
Mm-hmm.
when you begin to install an AI agent somewhere where it has the potential to have access to those things, you have to really gate it in. And this is where the big risk comes from, and probably worth um, some some early testing. I'm drawing a blank on the type of testing I'm referring to right now, but it's really before any code is getting written, would be worth to sit down with the architect and say, tell me, where are you dropping in this bot, and
Mm-hmm.
what is in its direct line of access, because if it has any direct line of access, you must assume it will get access to that. It's smart enough to navigate its way to it. And so you really have to pin it in somewhere where it can have access to certain critical things. It's really, really going to be critical.
Yeah, some of the so-called guardrails, that it that we hear about. Yeah, yeah. So so we were talking earlier, you and I, just in a private conversation about how you've discovered kind of this. I'm going to call it a failure mode, for lack of a better term. And by the way, I sometimes question the definition of the term hallucinations. I mean, I get it. I kind of see it as like if you're generating a picture and the person has six fingers or something like that. I get the idea that, yeah, it appears like it's a hallucination, but to me, it's a failure. You're expecting it to do one thing and it's doing something else. It's hallucinations almost like a glitch, or it's a very casual term. And go, oh yeah, I mean, it's kind of like your example of the child. Uh, to say, yeah, I was having a conversation with my friend the other day, and they started hallucinating. You'd probably be thinking, okay, how much how much do you trust that friend, and how much did they reveal of your conversation?
That's a good
But
point.
but but anyway, yeah. Let's talk a little bit about this these failure modes that you've discovered.
Yeah, this is an interesting one that I sent over a paper that was actually AI generated from a topic I had with Claude on something that I found out while I was working through a project. Um, and I've actually got a diagram I'm gonna bring up here if that seems okay to you.
Yes, absolutely.
Let me share this.
A picture would be great.
A picture would be great. All right, I want to see if you can see this diagram here.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the interesting things I learned about the nature of AI, um, and I've seen the fruit of this, and it's going to be a little bit counter to what we are trained in as quality engineers. So this is a good time to catch this reality, because if you're an experienced quality engineer, you should know things like boundary value analysis. You should know about positive, negative, and boundary testing. These should be like foundational bricks in your work, because we
Mm-hmm.
know that defects almost always fall at the transition point from one thing to another, where exception handling kicks in. Anybody who's been working in testing for a while knows that's where the good stuff you usually find.
Mm-hmm.
But this is the exact opposite problem, and this diagram kind of shows it to you. Right now I've just kind of nicknamed it. I'm sure we'll come up with an official name for it, but there's a horseshoe curve problem when working with AI tools. And that is when you submit large volumes of data to it, it pays the most attention to the thing on one end and the other end, and it actually pays less attention or has less contextual information about what's in the middle. So much so, it might actually make the middle up. That may be partially why we see the hallucinations. I actually think hallucination is just a defect we haven't come up with a name for yet. So,
Yeah.
like you said, like the word glitch, there's no true glitch. that's just lingo for we're not sure why it did it, but glitches don't really exist. But not understanding what caused something to fail does exist. The same thing probably is going to wind up being true of a hallucination. We haven't figured that piece out yet. So if you look at this diagram, I think you can see my mouse moving here.
Uh-huh.
Let's imagine we have a data set. We have part of it here, a big data set. Let's say it's 10,000 rows of data or even 1,000 rows of data that we might be validating. This could be sales tax data. This could be maybe quantities of something, I don't know, related to medical work or something to that effect. This could even be related to altitude data. Imagine if we were working on flight data or any kind of a critical thing. So over here I have a data set, the beginning, and over here I have the end. And what we have found is that the AI has the most awareness of the things on the end, but in the horseshoe in the middle are the things that it pays the least attention to. And so you and I would, Randy, we would naturally want to go to the ends of the data. We would say, well, what do we get if we put a -1 in or a 0? Or if this was, 0 to 100, what happens when I put 100.01 or something like that?
Uh-huh.
We would probably be less likely to put values in at 50 or 60 just because our training up to this point has said, usually this stuff is more stable. The good stuff's over here.
Uh-huh.
Now, realize a junior, I think it's worth covering because we have, for the audience here, we may have the whole range of quality engineers watching. When you're early in your quality career, automation engineers fall into this all the time, but so do test engineers. They kind of feel like they got to test every point along the line. And very quickly, you come up with this reality that you can't. And that's why we have test techniques like equivalence partitioning and other techniques that hopefully you have some familiarity with, and I'm sure Randy has plenty of teaching on that. So for our QA engineers out there, this is a new area of risk that you should now pay extra attention to. If AI is involved in any part of the process, you should be pretty intentional to start looking for things towards the middle, and at least running some test cases here, especially around validation of numbers or things that could be related to the cost of finances, maybe affect somebody's livelihood or safety, something to that effect. This would be a new critical area to pay attention to. And remember, when you do that, you can't derive this data from AI. I think this is also a good point to talk about the importance of oracles. An oracle is simply a person within the organization who's willing to put their name on the line and say, I've certified this is a correct value.
Uh-huh.
And that should be something really worthwhile for us to have aware as a QA as practitioners. What's your thoughts, Randy?
Right. Well, yeah, I mean, I think that's a really interesting and useful observation. One of the things that it reminds me of, when we were talking about equivalence partitioning, at first it seems like a very weak technique because you're just picking some value between 2 points or some value out of a set or something like that. But it kind of reminds me, I tried to address a little bit of this issue way back. I remember I did this talk in 2012 at Eurostar, and I called it intelligent sampling. That they were looking for innovations in testing, and at the time there's a show on Discovery about these gold miners that would that they were neophytes. Okay, you mentioned the gold rush, So these guys found out about some of this land out in Alaska that they thought had gold in it. So they knew very little about gold mining. All they knew was to take a bulldozer out and start scraping off dirt off of this acre or two of land and running it through water and then looking for gold. And they were really struggling. They weren't finding much, in that approach. And they finally, about in the third or fourth season, they ran across this guy. He was, I think, from Norway or something. And he had a totally different approach. What he would do is he would drill with an auger bit down in the area that they were mining. He would take samples,
Mhm.
and then they would take a bucket of that dirt, and then they would put that bucket through the water, as opposed to just all the dirt they could possibly get. And if they start finding gold, then they would drill another sample, drill another sample. And I drew the correlation of defect clustering. So once you start to find one defect, then you kind of look around it, and if they tend to cluster, if that's true,
Hmm.
I think it probably is. That that gives you some kind of rationale for where do we take these sample points, because it, like in your example there, let's say it is from 1 to 10,000. um, am I going to test, all in that range? Maybe start at the midpoint and maybe start go to quarter points or something like that.
Yeah.
But I do think that it's a very interesting observation, and it sure wouldn't hurt to include those kinds of tests. Something else you mentioned to me, though, gets my attention too, and that's the language, the coding languages that are being used
Yeah.
many times with AI, and how they can deliver vastly different results.
Yes.
What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I actually published a white paper on this, and I'm going to pull it up so I can remember. The white paper I published on this came from, again, some work I've done in coding. I am one of those guys that I'm going to put it to the test. Ronald Reagan, when he met with Gorbachev, when they brought down the wall, he said, trust but verify. I
Mm-hmm.
am one of those guys when it comes to QA. I might trust with AI. To be honest, I don't quite trust it yet, but I'm going to go ahead and verify the darn thing. And so, that's the way I'm wired. I want to understand it. And
Yes.
so, the question is, just like all of the other AI terminology, the language of Python has become the go-to for a lot of people.
Yeah.
Um, why Python is the question we should ask. Python is it's an easy to access language.
Mm-hmm.
It's like basic to me. It's like one of those good entry level languages. And this isn't meant to shame people learning Python. That's what they've learned. Actually, again at that Google conference, a lot of people said, I only know Python," and people are looking down for me on that. I'm like, I don't look down for you on it, but I think you should also learn a strongly typed language like Java or C++ or something like that. Should be in
Mm-hmm.
your, if you're going to be a dev, you really should know that as well. But I decided to dig into that question. How did we get to Python as the go-to language in AI? It is a fascinating story. It's actually kind of an older language. I didn't realize it had come, I believe, from the late 80s. It got
Mm-hmm.
its name through Monty Python and the Flying Circus. Everybody, they always use the snake. But the guy who created it was a big Monty Python fan, and that's why it has the
Mm-hmm.
name it has. But it really got adopted by the scientific and the data analysis community because it was fairly approachable. It was easy to get your arms around. But
Mm-hmm.
Python has a fundamental flaw in it as a language. It's just a weakness. It's not that it's always fails here, but coders need to be aware of it. The same flaw lives in the language Ruby and potentially even in JavaScript. And that is, we call it a duck typed language. Duck like a duck quacking. Sometimes people will actually use this term. If it quacks like a duck and looks like a duck, it must be a duck. Well, languages actually perform, including Python, perform this reality, and that is when you put code together, you don't define what types of variables those are. So, for instance, if we're working with financial data, and let's say that most of the data are round numbers, like $10 and $15 and whatever. By nature, those could be integer values, being that they have no floating point values to them. But all of us that work with money realize that's not true for money. Money has to account for floating points because there's always fractions of, in our case, a dollar.
Mm-hmm.
And so Python out of the gate isn't a strongly typed language, which means it will try to make up its best decision based on the data it's got, and it might determine, oh, I'll just make these integers, and bam, I hope the light bulb just went on for everybody. This is a new defect, and I wrote it up in a web paper where I actually wound up finding 6 types of defects that exist in AI, not just one flavor of it across the
Hmm.
board in the AI landscape today as we speak. And if I can share the URL real quick, Randy, I will.
Yeah, please.
A lot of my stuff you can find at missionwares, missionwares.com, missionwares.com/silent hyphen confidence. And I
Okay.
have published a paper there of the findings that I have found 6 types of defects that exist right now, and the experiments you can run to find the defect actually show up right in front of your very eyes.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah. And so as soon as you do, um, again, for our quality community out there, you should pay super attention, because what you're going to find is if you don't tell AI what to use at the back end, it will likely default to Python. But you might not know this. You can actually tell AI to not use that. So I force it sometimes to use C or some other type language, because I want to ensure that its back end assessment and what it might build things with or whatever
Hmm.
are languages that are strongly typed. So it makes the assessment ahead of time. The experiments I provided actually show where I put numbers in that you can do by hand and come up with the correct values, and where you can give it to AI and watch it give you the wrong value. And it's because the Python defaulted to the wrong value type, the wrong variable type, and actually produced the incorrect value. See how
Wow.
critical that would be? Now,
Yes.
hopefully, all of you guys are thinking about, if I have an oracle in place, I should have a fixed data set that's been certified by a human being. But you and I both know more and more people are going to turn that over to AI, and that could lead to some really, really risky events coming up very, very soon.
It could. And, even I find interesting, I do a fair amount of work in the cybersecurity space, and, these vulnerabilities that we all hear about, uh, they are essentially software defects that just, can be manipulated and leveraged and have a security impact. And one of those is to break the data type that you're working with. So if you can feed alpha data to a field that you would think is expecting numeric and cause it to throw unexpected behavior at that point, then that might just give you the leverage that you need to gain access to something. So to me, this is a hugely important topic.
Hey Randy, you just made me think. I missed one real important fact in that, but you just hit on the point, and that is the reason that I call this paper the silent confidence framework. Is normally when you have a mismatched type in a language like a strongly typed language like Java, it will
Hmm.
throw an error, and the developer then knows they need to go fix the error. If you try to
Hmm.
feed an integer into a float, it's not going to work. It's not those variable types, unless you transform them, have to be of the same type, or you will get a compiling error. Here, please hear this. The default action that Python has when it runs into that is it gives you the thumbs up that everything was okay, and that's why it returns the values that it does. So instead of it producing an error that says something's not right here, it actually errs on the side of throwing no error and continuing forward. That is a fundamental flaw in the language, or at least in its usage to decide what kinds of variables it does. That, again, I'm not really thrilled about. Hopefully, as Python grows, they'll continue to fix that. But right now, that bug exists. And you need to know, that's why I call this the silent confidence framework. Is it silently failing but saying everything looks good? That's interesting.
Right. And of course, we know as testers we can't test everything, so we don't get a chance to encounter those failures all the time, and that's why that silent framework is good to look at.
Hmm.
Yeah, if you would, why don't you share your screen there of your silent confidence
Sure.
um,
Let's do
site.
that.
I'd like for the folks to be able to see that and to kind of see what you've done there, because I do think it's really interesting.
Yeah.
Um,
Here you can what this is a couple things in this tool that I did. You can get to the white paper right here. and that will it just lead you into the things you can run. It'll lead you into the experiments you can execute. There are 6 types that I've discovered up to this point. You can see I've actually provided real code here you can execute to see the result.
You bring
But
the receipts.
what's that?
You bring the receipts.
Yeah. But what I also did is created a tool here. If you just click on this copy, it actually is pasting a prompt into your clipboard, and you can see if you can use this prompt along with what you're about to request from AI, and it will actually tell you if it's going to introduce this silence confidence error. So there's some interesting tools here. These are a little more complex, but look, for our community, we should press into the hard things.
Mm-hmm.
Good defects. Imagine that it's your family member getting on that airplane, or your family member receiving medication calculated by some tool like this that could be wrong. One of the experiments I did was around temperature readings,
Mm-hmm.
and Python defaulted. If you think about a thermometer, if I have 100-degree temperature versus 100.9, well, that's almost a 1 degree difference. But I found that if I pass that into Python, it stripped the numbers off, the remaining numbers off, and it just said, well, he just has 100, even though I was running 100.9. And so you can see how a value like that could be, potentially an issue if it was to come to somebody's health or a group of people that you're monitoring, maybe to determine if they're sick or anything like that. This is a good reason you need to be aware of the backend languages that might be used without your even awareness at all. So you should be aware of how Python is being used, and you should know that you can instruct your AI tool to use other languages other than Python. And that's exactly what I'm doing more and more now because of this problem. And actually, it's finding real defects because of that.
Well, that's really interesting, and I really like the proofs that you give down there because it does show. I mean, to me, when I saw the data, when I actually saw, okay, here are some examples of where these failures occur, and you're doing it from a proof context. I think, with AI, we may have to start relying more and more on that kind of approach, especially if we can't replicate things, if we can't test deterministic failures, we can at least establish proofs that would show, based on what we've seen,
Mm-hmm.
that this potential there would exist. In a lot of safety critical software, they do monitor things like temperatures of things. I know in the work I did with NASA, one of the things that is monitored on satellites is the temperatures of things like batteries and things like that, because if they reach a certain point, then they have the risk of exploding, you know. And so if that were to fail in some way, then you could lose an entire spacecraft
Yeah,
or
millions
something like
of
that.
dollars. Yeah,
Yeah, or think about a medical device implanted in someone.
I
Um,
know.
the results could be catastrophic, and we're clearly heading in that direction. Or, with
Yes.
self-driving cars or anything autonomous, uh, those could really be uh, some big impact things. I just want to branch off into one other thing real quick, and then we'll wrap up. But I happened to catch a interview. I forget the guy's name from Google, but he was talking about vibe coding, and he was acknowledging that yes, a lot of people are using it. Vibe coding, by the way, is for those aren't. I'm going to take some of your advice, Greg. For those who aren't familiar with the term, it's basically uh, creating code by the use of prompts, and the idea that you can go from design to code without actually coding. And one of the things that was he was talking about there was that yes, you can create some code that way, but it's not ready for prime time, so to speak. You've got to go in and you've got to verify it. And then I saw another speaker. He talked about how it even compounds. So when people don't get the results they want, they just simply prompt again and get more vibe coding, and it actually starts to degrade until you reach a point of getting garbage. And the main reason is because you have not applied uh, good principles such as low complexity uh, and modularization, things like that, that you would typically consider if you were trying to create efficient, elegant code. Uh,
Hmm.
the AI tools don't always have that same mindset. So I'm kind of drifting here a little bit, but uh,
No.
it's a uh, it, it it's a common problem right now because people are starting to rely. Many developers are starting to rely a lot on vibe coding, and honestly, I think some of their managers are encouraging it. Code faster, and we all know that good code is not a matter of speed. Okay, bad code can incur a lot of penalties in terms of speed. Uh, but anyway, I'm digressing here. Probably preaching to the choir, actually. But
No.
anyway,
Randy, I have a kind of a similar piece like that, and whenever I get a chance, and today would be one of those, whenever I get a chance to speak into our community, I always say that the work of a quality engineer is a little bit like the work of a policeman. Not that we police people's work, but it requires you to have a great integrity, a type of integrity that exceeds your manager and other things like that. You have to be the one that's going to kind of call the baby ugly sometimes.
mhm,
And this is not an easy role to do. Um, that term that the customers are is right, it doesn't apply in the work of QA. All right. If it is, you're in the wrong role. Go get into sales or something like that. But as a quality engineer, if you abide by that sort of thinking, I've had quality managers that have told me that that's a failure on their part in management. What will happen is you will begin to get compromised in the message you have to deliver. And
mhm,
so we oftentimes are the last advocate for the customer and for the
mhm,
company brand and other things. And hopefully you work with management that will back you up sometimes when you have, all the time, when you have hard things you have to encounter and you need to say, this isn't ready to ship. Or we have this high risk here related to we put a prompt in and it started spitting out our code. That shouldn't happen.
mhm,
Those kinds of things you need to have the freedom to say. So remember, if there was ever even a time that you're going to be more tempted than ever, AI is going to allow you to generate an enormous volume of content, and
mhm,
your manager might not even have enough experience to realize what's legit and what's not. Of
mhm,
resist the desire to just make large content. That's a smokescreen, and instead create the right content that raises the awareness to risk. And that's kind of my announcement, my public service announcement for today. But I feel like we got to keep driving that home to the community.
Yeah, I totally agree. I was just seeing a story on our local news station last night about a local attorney that had been sanctioned by our state Supreme Court here in Oklahoma for using citations in some briefs that were just fictitious, and turned out he'd been using ChatGPT to do some of his research on some of the case law and things like that. Um, uh, One other thing too, prompted by your comment there, that you know uh, so many times I think management, especially the higher up in the organization you go, that they get a lot of their information from just dubious places, you know, and we've certainly seen this a lot with test automation. Once again, kind of circling back to that idea that the perception that everyone's doing great with tools, there's also a similar perception that everyone's doing great with AI. They're getting ahead of us. If we don't keep up, we're going to miss out. We're going to lose business, and the the results, actually, if you look at them on the ground, what the research is showing is that it's not that, okay. It's not that everyone's doing great, And it's not, it's the it's not in the volume. In fact, one other little data point, I'm working on this article, uh, and I came across this yesterday also, that YouTube now is starting to totally demonetize channels. In fact, maybe even eliminate channels that are heavily using AI.
Hmm.
And that's kind of an interesting thing too. LinkedIn is starting to, their algorithm is starting to not promote content that appears to be just generated solely by AI. And the platforms are seeing this, and I think we're going to come to a realization, or I hope we do, as an industry, as management, just not to jettison people because we're going to replace them with AI and automation. We need to keep the the um, the knowledge that they have. It has something that AI doesn't. Now I'm
Yeah,
getting into a totally different topic. So, but anyway,
that's good, Randy. We can make that another follow-up. I'd love to do that
yes,
some.
yes. That'll be a good follow-up topic for the future. Well, Greg, do you have anything else you want to share with us before we wrap this one up today?
Probably one other website I'd love to pass on, especially to the automation engineers. A new website I have called Go for Green, goforgreen.missionwares.com.
Okay.
And this is something I put together while I was actually at the Google conference, because um, I realized that there was a demo at the conference. Someone was trying to show how you could use AI to generate automation, and
Hmm.
he was a dev. He wasn't a QA. And when he had problems, he just encouraged the AI to go in and make the automation run. I call it a go for green. It means we're basically encouraging a passing test, not a testing test. He didn't see any problem with it at all. It's remarkable. Again, here is someone, this isn't what this person's trained in. And I know he did his best, but he was actually, in this case, encouraging an entire venue of people around this idea of automation to run no matter what and pass. Hopefully, you guys all see the error of that way. And so I decided one evening to put this website together. Go for green.missionwares.com. It's actually very fun to run. It gives you two paths you can take, and you can see how one company wound up getting sued and out of business, and another one succeeded because they did the right thing.
My goodness. First of all, the that thing is real. Okay, the Gopher Green is real. I've lived it, I've seen it, and it's not good. It's totally like, I don't know. In any other context, we would just say that is not good. If you went into a restaurant and they were serving bad food, but for some reason they had a way to detect or to show this is good, this is good, this is good. You go to the grocery store, let's say, and everything looks good. You get it home and it's rotten. That's the analogy there, that you're dealing with. The second thing I want to say is, I hate you. Okay, you create a website overnight. I'm struggling to get mine back up to date again.
Uh,
But no, I'm just joking. I
I,
love you, man.
I know, I
Um,
know.
well, listen, I'm going to put links to all this in the show notes, folks, so that you can go and you can see all the cool things that Greg has done here. If you want to contact him, you can do him. You can reach him through those those websites, and you can also connect with him on LinkedIn. I really encourage you to, if you have any needs in the area that we've just been discussing or anything else. I mean, he's a man of many talents. Um, Feel free to reach out to him. You can reach me through my website, riceconsulting.com, mysoftwaretesting.com. I have plenty of places you can interact with me as well. But I really give Greg some of my highest recommendations, and
Mhm.
you won't go wrong with him. So,
Thank you,
um,
Randy. It's very kind. And I likewise say the same thing. Randy and I have worked together a long time, and he's one smart man. And I highly esteem his wisdom. I've learned an awful lot from him over the many, many decades we've been friends. So thank you, Randy.
Well, thank you, Greg. Well, with that, we will wrap this one up. Thanks for watching, folks, and I will see you guys in the next episode. Greg, thank you so much for being a part of this conversation today. I think it's
Absolutely.
been very, very valuable.
Thank you, Randy. I agree.
Okay,
Bye.
have a good day, folks.